Welcome, all you various and sundry denizens of the interwebs. I'm Telkmaster, and I want to talk about the Adventure Pals. I feel like it's one of those common memories for gamers around my age that have at one point invested heavily into gaming hardware only to spend all their time playing random Flash games instead. These games started to show up when I was in high school on Flash animation sites like Newgrounds, but the dedicated Flash arcade didn't really come into its own until my university days. But first, I suppose I should clarify some things for those who didn't follow web technologies around the turn of the millennium. Back in the days before it was called Flash, it was exclusively an animation program. At a time when storage space and internet speeds were both very limited compared to today, its vector-based files were more suited than any pixel-based formats for the web. Interactivity on pages back then was also extremely limited, so technologies like Flash filled the need with their built-in ActionScript language. And of course, you give people something to program with, they will make games with it. A Flash arcade was a site that basically provided a single location to find all these games people were making. These ad-laden sites gave these Flash developers the opportunity to make some money with their games, and I personally like to think of this as the first indie game explosion. A lone hobbyist developer prior to this would have a hard time with discoverability and distribution, let alone actually making any money. This period was actually only a few years long before technology marched onward. Improvements in JavaScript and HTML5 meant that most of Flash's functionality was now redundant to what was natively available in browsers without a plugin. Storage and network improvements made the file size progressively less of a concern, and when Apple announced they weren't going to support Flash on their iOS devices due to security and performance concerns, it was pretty clear even to Adobe that Flash was going the way of the video cassette. It's now gone back to its roots as Adobe Animate without the browser plugin portion, and now can render its output as HTML5 and videos instead of focusing on Flash's proprietary file format. As for those Flash game devs, opportunities arose elsewhere. The sites themselves still exist, but what new games there are tend to be made in HTML5. The growing smartphone market and increasing popularity of direct download via services like Steam have led to a second indie game explosion, and the latest entries and franchises that started in Flash can usually be found in one of these markets, if not all of them. Which brings us to the Adventure Pals, a 2018 game developed by Massive Monster and published by Armor Games Studio, the game publishing spin-off of the Armor Games Flash arcade site. While it is Massive Monster's debut game, it is actually a sequel to the 2012 Flash game Super Adventure Pals created by the same developers before the official founding of the studio. Looking into it further, the game eventually known as the Adventure Pals started development in Flash under the title of Super Adventure Pals 2. A creator cameo in the finished game, making a joke about 6 years of development, points to starting almost immediately after the release of the original game. According to a blog post, the game was originally developed using the Hex language and OpenFL, an open-source equivalent to the Flash API, most likely because Flash was already on the decline by the time the first game came out. It seems like the game was largely finished by the middle of 2016, and the last year and a half or so of development was mostly porting to the Unity engine with the help of Do Games, a company that specializes in porting. Unity then enabled it to be ported much more readily to all of the different consoles and operating systems. For the sake of thoroughness, I tracked down the original Flash game and gave it a play. It is an action platformer with a straightforward premise. A boy named Wilton is out having a picnic with his giraffe Sparkles and his pet Rock, Mr. Rock, when the nefarious Mr. B shows up and runs off with the pebble-sized pet. Gameplay then ensues over the course of 3 worlds with 5 levels and 1 boss each. Each world contains a hub town with people you can talk to, which unlocks the levels. Completing each level grants you a ruby, which you need all 5 of before unlocking the boss fight for that world to earn the final ruby. Completing levels a second time gives diamonds, which can be used to buy special, sometimes game-breaking abilities from each town's store. Completing the boss fight gives you access to the next world and a new movement ability for Sparkles, which will be necessary to complete future levels. Like most Flash games, it's a short and rather easy experience that can be completed in about 2 hours. Coins are plentiful and can be used to buy health potions and bombs. Experience drops from enemies constantly and gives a choice of either improved defense or attack on level up. Death is cheap but forgiving, since contact with most dangerous obstacles means instant death and a reset to the beginning of that particular level segment. Like many games of the era, the real challenge comes from the grade given at the end of a level, which requires quick completion and no deaths to receive an A+. It's a fun game that generally controls well, but definitely still has some rough spots. It has a nice idea of allowing users to choose which hand controls the movement or does actions, WASD or the arrow keys. Being a longtime keyboard and mouse user, WASD was the obvious choice for movement, and using the arrow keys worked fine when the only needed key was the attack. As additional abilities are unlocked, the instinct to flip the controls based on character orientation caused some confusion and mishaps. Of course, these are mileage may vary concerns, since people with different gaming backgrounds will have different muscle memory, and it's still a good attempt at dealing with the Flash plugin's lack of controller support. Less so is the fact that upgrading attack causes your weapon to look progressively larger and more elaborate without increasing the hitbox. This sort of hitbox dissonance is a minor nuisance, and overall the game shows a level of ambition and competence above what you would expect even for a late-era Flash game, all wrapped up in the humor and aesthetics that grew out of that corner of the internet. Now, what about the NonFlash sequel and supposed actual subject of this video? Well, in proper sequel fashion, it's best described as the same but more. The story is neither a prequel or sequel. Wilton is celebrating his birthday with his grandpa, who gives him a giraffe he names Sparkles. Grandpa's supposed old friend Mr. B shows up and kidnaps him, revealing that he has been kidnapping old people and turning them into hot dog monsters for quote-unquote reasons. Mr. Rock shows up soon after, and more plot ensues as the game progresses, which exists mostly to provide further context to why you're constantly collecting rubies and why these giant gems are at the end of these levels. Levels are set up basically the same as before, but bigger with more extra paths for hidden treasure chests, as well as the cupcakes for the Cupcake King in each section and a single sticker hidden somewhere in the level. Collecting all the cupcakes and stickers are necessary if you're going for the A+ grade in a level, but you only need to collect them once for it to count. The overall difficulty is greatly lessened thanks to controller support and better mapping of the movement abilities, which are all available from the start. Diamonds were nixed with repeat level completions rewarding a giant bag of coins and special abilities being granted upon level up, which now improves both your health and damage simultaneously. Death is much rarer now that spikes only do a bit of damage and put you back to the last spot of solid ground you stood on. In fact, thanks to the plentiful auto-use potions, I didn't experience my first death until some point in the final world, mostly due to my own sloppiness for not needing to be terribly careful for most of the game. I think this game manages to be something like the platonic ideal of a sequel. It's a refinement of the original without fundamentally changing it. It's bigger with 4 worlds of 5 levels and a boss each, plus a level and a boss at the end, bonus arenas in each world, and even a rhythm minigame tucked in there as well. New gameplay concepts are introduced regularly throughout the game, and the levels are varied enough to feel unique and worth revisiting to find collectibles missed the first time around and maybe shoot for an A+ grade. Financially, it's done rather well for Massive Monster. In a 2-year sales report on their blog, they mentioned that the game has net them almost 7 figures overall. It's proven much more popular on consoles than Steam, with the Switch alone being more than a third of the total sales, something they attribute to being an early title on a new platform. Just to be clear, while that net total probably sounds like a lot to someone working a regular job, you have to keep in mind a business's operating expenses eats up most of that. However, it has been enough to keep the lights on through the release of another platformer called Never Give Up in early 2019, and help fund another currently unnamed game. As one of many Flash developers who successfully moved to other platforms, they are a great example of the Flash Arcade's continued legacy.